Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mind My Age, presented by Total Life, therapy designed for healthier aging and covered by Medicare. I'm your host, Neelam Brar, and today we have a truly special guest, Andrea Driessen. Andrea is a celebrated speaker whose TED Talk has over 2 million views. She's a 3-time award winning author, and she volunteers at a hospice. She's devoted her time to an incredible idea that might just change how we think about honoring others and ourselves: grace notes. Instead of waiting for eulogies after death, Andrea advocates for expressing love, appreciation, and acknowledgement while people are still alive, allowing them to hear the impact they've had on the world. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, and thank you, Neelam, for inviting me. It's an honor to be on your podcast.
Now, before we dive into the beautiful concept of grace notes, I always start with the question, how old do you feel today? And before you answer that, let me share why we ask this. At my age, we believe in the incredible power of the mind to improve your mental and physical health. Research shows that maintaining a positive mindset about aging can add an extra 7.5 to 10 years to your lifespan and health span. So, how old do you feel, and how do you embody that? What are the changes you've made in your life to feel young?
Would say I probably feel half my age. I will just be frank. I will turn 60 in about a half a year, and I'm very healthy. I do a lot of yoga, uh, a fair amount of biking, walking, getting outside, some hiking. I live in Seattle, so that's easy to do. Uh, but no, I hope that I can maintain that level of fitness and rightness in my body as I age.
Andrea, your story about your father is so powerful, and I love the way you captured his life through the grace note you wrote to him before he passed. Can you tell our listeners where this idea of grace notes came from and why you believe it's so important to honor people while they're still with us?
It came literally out of my love for my dad. It's comes down to a deep-seated desire to honor who he was and how he showed up in the world and do it before he died. In doing so, I wrote him what I called at the time a living tribute. I knew well enough at that time, who wants to receive a eulogy while they're still living, but I hadn't yet conceived of the idea of grace notes. And I just assumed at the time, and this was 15 or more years ago, that writing such a note of honoring to a parent or someone you really care about is a natural thing to do and a frequent, a common thing that people do. Turns out it's not so common. So, as I was telling people about having written this note to him, people were sort of taken aback and they said, "Oh, gosh, I want to do that for my parent or my loved one." And that's where it all started.
It's incredible how a simple letter or a note can really shift relationships. And I know you've seen that firsthand. For example, your friend Sandy, who wrote a grace note to her mother before she passed, found a new kind of compassion and forgiveness. Can you share more about how this practice has changed both the feelings of the giver and the recipient?
I think when we write a note of appreciation and a note of acknowledgement, a note of mattering, these are really notes of how someone shows up and matters to you, how they make an impact for you. It makes us better observers of someone else's behavior, but it also definitely deepens the bond you have with somebody. And I think it's especially valuable if you feel estranged from someone and you feel this prickliness with them, like Sandy did with her mom. It can, even if you don't send the note, it magically can do away with, dissolve those feelings of resentment or a lack of love, and can help us feel more connected, human to human, with one another. I think that's all the more valuable in a world that is increasingly artificial, when so much is technologically based. For us to get a physical note we hold in our hands and can refer back to when we may feel down or despondent allows us to feel the humanity in ourselves, feel more compassion for ourselves and with the person for whom we've written the note.
You said something really interesting there, which is it can help strengthen the bond even if something prickly has occurred. What is your advice to our listeners who have somebody in their life that they want to rekindle the relationship with, and maybe a grace note is a way to start that, or that, olive branch.
Mm, olive branch. Great word for that. I do have an actual process that I recommend to people in my workshops, and I'll share it now with listeners. And it sounds counterintuitive, but hear me out. So, if you feel that sense of estrangement or prickliness with somebody, go ahead and write a draft of that note, your grace note or your letter of mattering. And do your best to just put your inner editor on the back burner. There's no right or wrong way you could ever do this. And then this is the trick. You go ahead and you snail mail, the US Postal Service or your postal service, you mail that letter to yourself. A couple days pass, the letter comes in the mail, you hold it as if you're the actual recipient, the final recipient, and you see it, you're a slightly different person when that note comes in the mail. You read it as if you are the recipient, and that might be just the nudge you need to go ahead and send it. Maybe make a couple tweaks and actually mail it or give it to the person it was intended for. At the same time, for some of us, we may feel complete. We may feel complete with the process. We may never go ahead and mail it, but I guarantee you that this act of sending and receiving it back to yourself will change the energy, the dynamic between you and the other person. It's quite magical. It's like something changes between you in this step.
I love that you said the pain of regret is always greater than the challenge of writing a grace note. That really hits home. I know there's many of us that wish we had shared our gratitude, or learned more, spent more time with those that are no longer with us. So, what's your advice to someone who might be hesitant about writing a grace note because they feel they're not good with the words or unsure what to say?
First of all, I want to normalize that feeling of awkwardness or hesitance. It is the most commonly cited reason I've found among people who say they're not quite ready to write a grace note. So let's just call it what it is. It's human to feel that way. Second, and I'm going to refer to a podcast that you produced very recently. You invited an award-winning writer, Kate Renton, last month in September 19th podcast. I recommend your listeners listen to that if they haven't already. I was absolutely enraptured by her wisdom. And I'll call out a specific thing. She said it so beautifully. She said, she talks about how one of the main reasons that she works with people who are trying to write their memoir. And I think of writing a grace note is not unlike that. And they're afraid of putting their words out into the world. They feel that awkwardness. They might feel like they're going to do it wrong. And she puts it in terms of the fear of being judged or misunderstood, or that we're afraid we're saying the wrong thing. And this is the key part. She says, the greater your fear of judgment, the closer you are to engaging in something that will bring great joy. This fear of judgment is a reflection of what's on the other side. And all of us are afraid of failure. So don't let that judgment be an indication of the rightness or wrongness of what you're about to do. You're not sure that why you're called to do something. Can you put the logic on the back burner? Can you put it aside and trust the non-quantifiable, the illogical reason, and trust that something really beautiful is going to come of it? And I am reading this and I'm getting goosebumps because her words are so powerful and they're so freaking true.
Yeah, look, I totally agree. It's we all know, things as beautiful as diamonds are even created under pressure. Things have to feel uncomfortable for change to happen. And sometimes even putting yourself in a situation where you're feeling stress or uncomfortable anxiety means that you're pushing through something new, and in that newness is beauty and realization and discovery. Which is why I love the idea of a grace note, because it forces us to really think about things that we don't talk about often and we don't share enough. It's really easy to find all the things that someone did wrong in your life, but how often are we actually sitting down and thinking and really reflecting on all the things they did right?
Absolutely. And in that same vein, I say this as well in my workshops. For some of us at any given time, the most compelling and important grace note for us to write may very well be the one we write to ourselves. To ourselves. Where can we give ourselves grace? Cut ourselves some slack because we are so hard on ourselves. Elizabeth Gilbert, the wonderful author Elizabeth Gilbert, has this term she calls a cloak of mercy. A cloak of mercy. And I think of this image of a cloak of mercy as a beautiful metaphor for how we can, if we're going to go into the headspace, the heart space of writing a grace note, can we wrap ourselves in a metaphorical cloak of mercy as a way to forgive ourselves, forgive whatever has gone on between you and the other person, and really find their essence, their goodness, how they show up in a way that so they don't have to wait till their eulogy is read over their casket to know that they mattered. You're not going to hear it. So, what can we do to make sure that everyone lives to hear their eulogy before they're gone?
So you said something interesting. You said first step is maybe to write it and send it to yourself. What should one be thinking about when they receive that, and what are they looking for? Like, what's the step after that?
I think it really depends. Trust your intuition. If you feel like, you know what, I might switch a word or two around and I'm going to go ahead and send it, or maybe you're going to want to start over. I hope not, but know that you can't do it wrong. There's no wrong way to do it. As Dr. Jane Tornator says, kindness doesn't demand perfection. I guarantee you that whatever you put out in front of a loved one, when it comes from a place of love and caring and acknowledgement, will make a positive impact. There's no other way. There's no other um, result.
I love that quote. Kindness doesn't demand perfection. I'm very guilty of sometimes overthinking a gift, and I start to kind of diminish even the simplicity of something because I think, oh, I got to make sure that they are going to see it and value it. And you forget how just a simple compliment can go a long way. And people need to hear it. And I sometimes am really, you know, eh, taken away by a simple compliment. It just goes to show how long even that small gesture and what an impact it can make.
Absolutely. I mean, you're reminding me of it was in the middle of COVID, and I was at the drugstore, probably getting a shot, and I was there was a piece of, plexiglass between me and the customer service person at the pharmacy, and could hear her on the phone while I was waiting. And she was so lovely with the people she was talking to on the phone. She's in the front lines. She's got a really hard job in the middle of a pandemic. And when she hung up the phone and it was my turn, I simply said to her, you're so good on the phone with people. I was really noticing how compassionate you were being, something like that. But it came from a true place. It just came out of me. And she was flummoxed. Like, how often is she getting any positivity from the public right now? Everyone's freaking out. So it was in that moment and then she paid me a compliment. She said something I don't even remember, but it was just a very memorable moment. This was years ago. And I, to your point, how well can we be fed by a simple positive comment, whether it's in a pharmacy or it's on the front lines of the workforce? It might just make our day. It might make our week.
The art of letter writing has really been lost with the digital age. And I think there's something really romantic and sensitive and personal about someone handwriting those thoughts. With your concept of grace notes, do you think it makes a difference if it's handwritten or emailed or typed?
So I have a few thoughts on that. There are a number of ways to look at it. First of all, I will I will zoom out a little bit and say if you're writing a grace note or anything that requires creativity, science supports the idea that we should use a pen and paper, like the old-fashioned way, to actually write our thoughts on a piece of paper, as opposed to using a device or typing. And because science shows that there's a more direct conduit between our creative side and what's coming out of our hand. It's just because, it's only recently in human terms that we have been using a device to communicate. So it taps into our biological history, evolution. Second, if there's no other way that you're going to do it, you're going to give a grace note and you want to type it out, by all means, type it out, or write it by hand and then type it. But I do think, as long as your writing is legible, to go ahead and give it as a handwritten note, because it's so much more personal. And then lastly, I would say if people often ask me, well, what about, the Gen Z? They don't want to get a letter. Well, I'll tell you, I think they do. And it's not a zero-sum game. You can go ahead and send a text to your favorite Gen Zer, not to single them out, but let's talk about the youngest cohort of adults right now, and type that thing out in a text. You know they're going to get it. But then send it in a note. Go ahead and mail it to them as a letter. I bet you dollars to donuts that letter is going to be on their desk until the end of time.
It's very true. I was cleaning up some old boxes and I came across a few handwritten letters that friends had written on one of my going away parties. And it was just so beautiful it took me right back to that moment with them. And so much in life has changed, but I think the profound effect that it had, that it was handwritten and very personal, was so nice. And I think about, like, in the last 5 years, I've not received a single handwritten note. We've really pulled away from that. I make a point of writing in birthday cards or anniversary cards, but um, I haven't personally written a letter in a long, long time.
I bet you if you did, you'd get more back. Not that that needs to be your motive, but when you mentioned birthdays, just last weekend, one of my closest friends had a birthday, and we decided as a friendship circle we would write her grace notes, and we brought them to the party and we read them out loud, and they were all on paper, and then she got to have those as a gift. And it was a very profound experience to have your best self reflected back to you on the day you're celebrating your birth. You said something too about, oh, as far as letters go, yes, they're so valuable to us. I keep my letters from my dad. If you listen to my TED Talk, you know what he meant to me. I bought a fire safe years ago, not to keep money or jewels in it, but to keep all of his letters, because they are my most precious possession. If this place burns down, I want to be sure that they are preserved. And so the whole fire safe is filled with his letters. Now, not everybody gets those kinds of letters from a parent, but you might get them from someone else, or collectively you get them from your people over time, and they are so precious.
Very true. At my age, we often talk about how therapy can unlock different aspects of our lives, whether it's your creativity, your emotional well being, even tracking that overwhelming task of reflection and writing. In your experience with Grace Notes, how do you see therapy playing a role in helping people overcome those barriers to expressing their emotions and reflections, and also to receiving that joy and acknowledgement? Some folks shut down when it comes to appreciating themselves.
I suspect that a lot of the impetus to go to therapy, which is, of course, exceptionally human, a human impetus, is a feeling of not enough, of less than, um, a gap between how you feel inside and how you're challenged to show up in the world. And a grace note can help fill that gap and be tangible evidence of your value in the world. And if I were a therapist, I would recommend writing that my client write a grace note for herself. And I'll tell you a little story. Many years ago, I had gone through a real awful breakup with a guy. And we've all been there. We've all had loves lost. And my first impetus was to write him one last love letter. It couldn't hurt to pour my feelings out one more time. And maybe he'd come back. And so I was getting ready to write that letter, that love letter to him. And maybe it was from therapy. I had enough sense in them. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm going to write a love letter to myself. Darn it. And I went ahead and I put it out there on a page. And I love to write. I'm a writer, professional writer. And so that's my jam. But you don't have to be a professional writer to write yourself a love letter. So I put it out on the page. And I'll tell you, I still pull that sucker out when I feel like crap. But my boyfriend never came back to me, but I came back to myself. Like I can see myself, my value, and give myself grace in the middle of losing a love.
Oh, that's so wonderful and inspiring. Your story about also using Mad Lib's approach to writing grace notes is very practical and relatable. For someone who's never thought about expressing these kinds of sentiments, what's an easy way to get started today?
First, I'll just mention, so folks don't necessarily have to take notes. If you go to my website on Grace Notes, I'll give you the URL in a second. I've posted a writing primer, a free primer, so that you can get 6 ways to ease the writing process. And the URL is grace-notes.org, grace-notes.org, and just go to the link that says writing primer. So no, first of all, you can't do it wrong. I want to just reiterate that once again. There's no way you can do this wrong. I also suggest that you go to a card store and find a beautiful card that just is begging for a note inside of it. A lot of people struggle with how to get started. How do they begin a grace note? And you'll find in the primer about 20 different writing prompts that I share, much in the Mad Libs, the spirit of Mad Libs. Maybe you're familiar with this game. It's that fun fill in the blank word game. Maybe you played it in a car ride as a kid. So writing prompts can be something like, when you walk in the room, there is more blank. I always laugh when I think about blank. Will bring up a great memory. Or maybe it's a work person that you want to acknowledge, a colleague. You slayed the whatever dragon, and what kind of story can you tell with that writing prompt? In any case, there are about 20 different prompts that you can use, and there are a couple at the end that are especially good for writing a letter to someone with whom you haven't been in touch with for a while. That is a challenge that a lot of people raise with me. They are concerned that, well, gosh, isn't it going to be really weird if I all of a sudden send this note to someone with whom I haven't been in touch in so long? And I would encourage you to do your best to put that aside. And one way to get around it with how you word it would be to say something like, I was walking down the street the other day and I saw this thing and it reminded me of you, and it's been a while since I was in touch. And so I wanted to tell you about that. It can be as simple as that. Or I saw this card in a card store and it was begging for a special note, and here it is. We overthink it. To your point a bit ago, yes, we overthink it. We have these big brains that get in the way. Can we go inside into our hearts and find a word that would reflect something true, something emotionally true, and know that there's no way you can do it wrong?
So I'm like a romantic at heart, and it's just really beautiful when you see those old love letters that were written by like folks that met and then were separated, whether it was during the war or otherwise. And the letters are so profound, sensitive. They take you to the moment. They're so good at capturing the essence of that feeling. And um, I find it very inspiring that people used to just naturally write like that. And today we struggle to write like that. And I think it's our, we have it in us to do it. So I'm excited to dive into your guide in figuring out how to do this better.
Great. Yeah, I wrote it to give people a roadmap because you don't have to struggle. You don't have to procrastinate. You don't have to have regret. You don't have to have writer's block. The other step I recommend, if you still feel blocked or want some help, find someone to write a grace note with. So in other words, a buddy with whom you partner and um, you tell about the person you'd like to grace, and you tell how they impact you, and the buddy takes notes for you. And then you switch and you do this for each other. And it's that simple. And what that does is you end up without having to, you never have to face a blank page. You have a roadmap, a framework to work from. Bam.
That's so beautiful. You mentioned that it's not just about family, but it's also about extending grace notes to possibly colleagues or friends or even your kids. Can you share a story where a grace note has had a profound impact on someone's life beyond family?
Yeah, so many. There was a woman who worked for a large Fortune 500 company, and she had, I don't think of it as unusual, but it was unusual within that culture, where she would keep an eye out for quirky or fun or impactful things that a colleague did, and she'd keep some notes. And then she would write a note from those notes to the person's manager. And she'd BCC she didn't call it a grace note, but the honoree. And the impact of these notes was enormous. The managers said things like, you've seen things in my colleague I didn't see. Um, and then the person who this letter was about said things like, in talking to you, I answered the phone differently. It was like, you read an author's book and then you get to meet them in person. It felt like that kind of a vibe. And these letters, these notes, these simple notes, nothing special, became integral in a lot of performance evaluations. So obviously the bottom line here is these, just keeping it simple, being consistent, doing a simple but profound act of kindness and mattering has an enormous ripple effect that you can't even begin to imagine.
Andrea, as we age, many of us think about the legacy we'll leave behind. Some of us tend to downplay the work we've done or don't think it mattered enough. And every little impact we've made matters. So, your work with Grace Notes seems to encourage people to reflect on their lives and the impact they've had, whether it's tiny or large, because each piece matters. What are your thoughts on how Grace Notes can contribute to a sense of fulfillment and contentment as we age?
Yeah, you mentioned the word legacy, which is so integral in the power of a grace note. As I like to say, when our goodness, our sense of how we matter is reflected back to us in the form of a note, we clearly see how we're making impacts, and we can live into the legacy that others see possible in us. We can live into the legacy that others see possible that we're not even seeing. It's like there was a book, a bestseller years ago called All the Light We Cannot See. It became a movie. Um, it wasn't about legacy so much, but it reflects to me that we are all the light we cannot see. And by getting a grace note, we have that light reflected back to us in ways that we can do more of those things. I'll give you a couple examples from actual grace notes where imagine that someone gave you a grace note that said in part, you display consistent integrity. I see how you consistently stick to your ethical principles and are reliable, trustworthy again and again. Wouldn't that inspire you to live more deeply into your integrity? We might not even be seeing how we are integrous. Or someone told you that whenever you walk into the room, there's so much more positivity and possibility. Wouldn't that influence how you walk into a room? Just two examples.
So many, many years ago, I did like a 1 week acting class at the New York Film School. And I remember the exercise, one of the exercises we did, many of them have lasted or stayed with me because I think there's a lot you can learn from the arts and how people prepare for a scene even because there's a lot of acknowledgement of who you are, where you're at. And so one of the exercises we did was we went around the room and everybody had to share what their impression was of the person when they walked in. And it was mind blowing for me because I remember that day I was nervous. I felt like I didn't belong. I had major imposter syndrome, and the 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 perception of everybody else was just notably different.
I think that has to be universally human. I bet you if you took a survey of everyone who walked into that room, the vast majority are nervous. They feel like they don't belong there. They're not sure how to proceed. They're worried about how they're being seen. And yet we tend to think everyone else has it figured out. It's just not true. It's just not true. I have this thing about imposter syndrome. I'm on a tear. I'm on a mission to help eradicate it. It's so common. It's like 80% of people suffer from imposter syndrome. People like Oprah in the past, Beyonce. This is a common human malady. But the thing is, one way to help reframe that sense of imposter that we all feel at least once in a while is to think about how when you consider all of the goodness that has been reflected back to you in the form of comments, letters, referrals, letters of recommendation, whatever it may be, would all these people who've said these good things about you, are they all conspiring against you and are they lying? No, they're not all lying to give you your goodness back to you. They're telling you a truth that you can't see. So part of us feeling more whole and less imposter, I really encourage folks to keep a folder, whether it's just a digital folder, it's also maybe a physical folder, of the comments that they get, even short emails or the shortest of texts that show us how we're showing up. And on those days where the caca is hitting the fan and we're just feeling like crap, we don't feel like we belong, we're in that acting class, but we don't have that exercise to tell us how we are really showing up. We can look back at those comments and remind ourselves of how we are making a difference in the world.
Andrea, so if we think about everything we discussed today, if you had to distill it down to a 5 steps, or some number of steps that people should think about or could follow in order to do their first grace note, tell us what that is.
It's going to be really simple. Get a piece of paper, get a pen, think about someone who really matters to you, how they're making an impact, and write it down. If you want, give it a couple days, come back to it, and switch it around a little bit, and then send it. Don't overthink it. And know that whatever your words are will make a positive impact. And remember, kindness doesn't demand perfection. We're not trying to get published in a poetry anthology. You're not trying to be an orator. You just want to sound like you and honor someone who's made an impact on you. It's as simple as that. Do not overcomplicate it.
Andrea, what's your biggest piece of advice for our listeners who want to start honoring people they love while they still can?
I'm going to answer it maybe in two ways. I want to say one important thing. There are maybe some listeners out there who are saying, you know what? There's no amount of time or tips in the world that's going to make me want to write something. It's just not something I am ever going to do. It is not my jam. I love you too. You know, it's okay that that's true for you. Maybe for you, it's about making a video of someone or a beautiful meal, cooking a beautiful meal that's a way of honoring and telling a story to someone you care about. Maybe it's a photo collage. I don't know, but it doesn't have to be writing. So let's also take that off the table as a reason not to. But I would say give it a try. It, and see what positive impact comes of it. I bet you that by writing a grace note, you will get so much back from it than you have expended to do it. And it will create inevitably a positive feedback loop of goodness that will have ripple effects beyond anything you can imagine. And just lastly, I would say think about how you've been to a funeral. Most of us have been to at least a funeral in our lives, unfortunately. But because we're all going to die, we have heard a eulogy read over a casket and maybe thought, wow, did this person, this now dead person, know anything that is being said so beautifully about her right now? No one should need to wait until they're dead to have their eulogy read.
That is so profound and so true. And it is silly that we wait until that day or that moment to reflect and honor somebody when we should be doing it while they're still alive. In fact, you've got me thinking. My mom and dad are celebrating their 50th anniversary next month, and which is a huge accomplishment. And they are hosting a really large party, inviting all of the, family, friends, cousins, relatives, colleagues that they've spent the last 50 years with to celebrate. And I'm thinking maybe I will write, or maybe I will hand out or put on each table a piece of paper with the prompts where people can share their thoughts and reflections on mom and dad, so that mom and dad can read them in the days that follow.
Absolutely. You could create a scrapbook of this. It will be the most, just such a treasured gift. It could keep it super simple, have some lovely paper and lovely pens, and on each one, write something like, and again, this is keeping it super simple so people don't overthink it or try to edit themselves. Tell us about a favorite memory of a time you spent with our parents. Or tell us about the biggest impact they've made on you, period. And see what, or maybe have each table have different prompts, but then collect those pieces of paper. And not everyone's going to do it. That's okay. But oh my God, what an enormously positive impact that goes beyond any kind of golden things that they will get on their golden anniversary.
Right? I think my mom and dad would love reading them, and I'll even maybe make space for people to do it live while they're there, because when people take them home, they might forget to do it. No, this has really inspired me. I'll let you know how that goes. So, Andrea, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Your work is such a beautiful reminder to all of us that too it's not you don't need to wait until it's too late to express how much someone means to us. And the work you're doing is so incredibly important, and the inspiration you're creating and the thoughts that you're making us reflect upon are so necessary, and we need more of that. Do you have any last uh, words for our listeners?
I'm in this moment landing on the quote you shared earlier. The pain of regret is always greater than the challenge of writing a grace note. And that is a truth that, without making this about something negative, regret, it will, by taking this one simple step, um, it will turn the tables on your level of connection with someone you care about most. And if I would only hope that if the pandemic taught us anything, it's about what we as hospice workers and people who sit at the bedside have known all along. And that is, we don't get to pick when and how we die. Very few of us do. And so today's the day, not tomorrow, because we never know. I don't want to sound morbid, but let's be real. We don't get to pick when the gig is up. And my brother died unexpectedly at age 47. He just didn't wake up one day. And so that informs my level of commitment to helping us all understand that this is it, folks.
Thank you again, Andrea, for joining us on Mind My Age. For my listeners, if you've been inspired by Andrea's story today, I encourage you to think about somebody in your life who might be someone you've not seen in a while, or someone you've valued and cherished but have not taken the time to acknowledge, as she beautifully put it, and write them a grace note. Remember, age with purpose, live with intention, and let the people you love know how much they matter to you. If you need support navigating emotional barriers or starting these conversations, Total Life's therapy services that are covered by Medicare are here to help you. So don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Until next time, stay mindful and stay connected.